I'm delighted to be here. Jocko reminded me that the last time I spoke to RIS was about 6 years ago when I was with the International Crisis Group, and I'm delighted to be back here in a very different capacity. Then I was doing research, primarily on North Korea, for the International Crisis Group, and now I'm focused more on development cooperation in third countries working, but I am still working on North Korea. And after all of my presentation, if what you would rather do is talk about North Korea, I'm happy to talk about North Korea. But I'm happy to have a chance to talk about something that's not North Korea related. And I was here when Andrei Lankov spoke, and I knew that between me and my topic, I wouldn't get quite the turnout. But I hope I can interest you in my topic and show you just how much Korea has changed. I was an intern at the Asia Foundation when I was a senior at Berkeley back in 1989, and I was working on a program called the U.S.-Korea Bilateral Forum. And we had Lee Hong-gu and Han Seung-ju and many other Kyung-won and many prominent Koreans going to San Francisco for a conference. I worked on that. And at that time, I met the Korea representative for the Asia Foundation, and I thought to myself, wow, this would really be a great job to have. I set that as really my life's goal. And it took me 23 years and some wandering in the wilderness for the previous few years. But finally, it happened. And so I'm delighted to be back in Seoul. And I was telling Brother Anthony at dinner that my first RAS meeting was back in '89. I was teaching English at Hagwon back then, and I think it was to see Horace Underwood speak, and I remember meeting Ambassador Greg. I had wonderful memories of RAS going back to the late 1980s, and this is my first time as a speaker in about 6 years, and I'm delighted to be here. What I'd like to do is to... This is not good. Okay, there we go. Is to tell you about who we are, if you're not familiar with the Asia Foundation. Tell you about the Korea office that we've had here since 1954. And then I'll focus on really the substance of my presentation, which is on our official development of Korea's official development assistance and our efforts to try and help Korea become a global development partner. But in some ways, the history of the Korea Foundation, Asia Foundation, in Korea it mirrors that of Korea, in that we have evolved as an organization in Korea over time. So we are an NGO, but we like to call ourselves an international development organization. And our current slogan, which is subject to change very soon, is that we're committed to a peaceful, prosperous, just, and open Asia-Pacific region. We've been in Asia and Korea for more than 50 years. In fact, we'll be having our 60th anniversary in a couple of years. And we're headquartered in San Francisco. We have a fairly large office in D.C. and 17 field offices. We're focused on international development assistance, capacity building. We focus more on software than hardware, training people rather than building buildings. And we have 5 major themes. We look at governance, law, civil society, economic reform, women's empowerment, international relations, regional cooperation, and our most recent newest theme is the environment. And we work with local partners. We're really forming partnerships with other NGOs, with the private sector, and with local and national governments. This is a map that shows you where our field offices are. And my quiz for you is where do we not have field offices? North Korea. North Korea, we operate here from Seoul, and I'll tell you about our activities in North. Where else? Burma. Yes, Burma. In fact, David Steinberg was the deputy representative in Rangoon in 1962 and was kicked out. And the reason he became a Korea specialist, and I consider him one of my close friends and mentors, was because he was kicked out of Burma. with the foundation in 1960. Where else do we not have an office?
Bangladesh.
Oh, we have a big program in Bangladesh. Why is
Like Japan?
Oh, Bangladesh. Oh, it's just where the name is. But that's actually Bhutan.
Bhutan.
Bhutan. We don't have a program in Bhutan.
Vietnam.
We have a big program in Vietnam. Where else do we not have a program?
Taiwan.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a map of Asia that chops off Japan at Kansai? We gave up on Japan. And this is our only office in developed Asia. We closed our offices in Taipei, in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Tokyo because we could not find a new mission, and perhaps more importantly, we couldn't find a new partners. So why should we be in Korea? We came here during the Korean War and then opened our office right after the Korean War. And Korea is ahead of the U.S. in some respects today. Economic growth, vibrant democracy. I won't comment on the state of American democracy. But so why should we be here? That became our question for developed Asia, and this is the only place where we have been able to find a new mission and new partners. We closed our offices in Taipei and Hong Kong and Singapore. So this is it for developed Asia. So most of our money comes from government, primarily the U.S. government, but also other governments that I'll show you in a moment. But we also get, we have a large books program, and we do get some foundation and corporate individuals. But overwhelmingly, we're funded by government and the U.S. government, both Congress and the State Department, USAID, are primary sources of funding. So this is just to show you who our largest non-U.S. donors are. The Brits, Australia is coming on strong. I don't think these numbers, we just signed a new agreement, multi-million-dollar agreement with Australia, the Netherlands, Canada, and now Korea is our newest funding source as Korea becomes the global development partner. This is just to show you where our biggest programs are. We have 17 field offices, and you can see that Afghanistan is by far and away our biggest program. We have quite large programs in much of Asia, Indonesia, Cambodia, Philippines being top three in East Asia. We have in-depth experience. I haven't met Steve Rude, but he's an even longer time Philippine specialist than I am Korea specialist, but I have met Gretchen, and I've met George, who runs our Nepal program. This picture was actually taken in Afghanistan. I have to say, it does look like Kathmandu, but it's actually Kabul in the background to be technically accurate. Really impressive individual, and I took a lot of mental notes on what it is to be a country representative. He's actually not a U.S. citizen. He's an Indian national raised in Nepal, and is now serving as our rep in Nepal. But I got to visit him a couple months ago to see about partnerships between the Korean government and our program in Nepal. Gretchen, I've been working with in Laos because our next exchange project with the Korea Development Institute's graduate school is actually to Laos. So my dream was to become the Korea representative for the Asia Foundation, but I never dreamed that I'd be going to Sri Lanka and India more than I'd be going to North Korea. So we consider ourselves a partner for change, for governments, for societies in Asia that are seeking change. Nilan Fernando is my sombe, my Berkeley sombe. I was just with him in Sri Lanka a couple months ago. Kim Nguyen, our representative in Vietnam, she was a boat person who went on to get her PhD from Yale. Eric Jensen is at Stanford. I don't hold that against him, even though I'm from Berkeley. But he's I got to meet him when I was last in San Francisco, and he's advising our law program. So we have a depth of experience, and we try to work with our partners. We focus on promoting elections, mitigating subnational conflicts, particularly in the Philippines, is where we're most active on this issue. Kai in the upper right picture is our deputy rep in the Philippines right now. I was with him in Da Nang, Vietnam, back in February. We try to foster community mediation. These pictures are from Nepal. Nepal had a horrible civil war, as did Sri Lanka, two countries I was in recently, and we've been trying to promote community mediation there. Community policing is another project that we have in several countries in Asia. And of course, we're trying to foster economic development is another big emphasis for us. And last but not least, empowering women has been a major focus of our activities in different Asian countries. And regional cooperation is also one of our focal points. And the Seoul office has actually become the regional office, the hub office for Northeast Asia. So I'm responsible not only for Korea, but Japan, China, Mongolia. All of our regional cooperation projects are run out of our Seoul office here. And one of our most recent themes is environmental management, environmental protection. Is a major focus of our program. Now, our oldest and our biggest program of all is our Books for Asia program. We have given about 46 million books since 1954 to all the countries of Asia. And we give about 1 million books a year, worth about $40 million. Now, what this is American publishers, textbook companies, all the major textbook companies will donate to us their previous editions that they can no longer sell. These are new textbooks, but they're 2009, 2010, 2011. They're not the latest edition, but for your average developing country, this is more than adequate for what they need. And so all we have to do as a foundation is pay for the shipping costs to send these books. So this is it's actually our oldest and our biggest program of all. It's called Books for Asia. The lower right are Mongolian children. So now I'd like to turn to our activities here in Korea, and so this will be a stroll down memory lane, if you will, to look at our activities in Korea over the years. And this is Education Minister Beck who accepted our very first shipment, this picture was actually taken in 1951. This is in Busan when we were sending a newspaper to be used for textbooks, which is what the North Koreans are using today, sadly. But this is for textbooks for elementary school and middle school students back during the Korean War. So that was our very first project here. Was during the Korean War. This is just to show you the funds that these are real dollars rather than inflation-adjusted dollars about the money that we spent. The green is by decade, and the purple shows you the cumulative. So we have roughly $1 million budget a year, and we've spent now over $45 million over the decades in Korea. I think I mentioned we tend to be a software, a training type organization, but we do have some tangible, real-world accomplishments. We helped fund the plans for the Gwanak campus for Seoul National University, which I attended back in 1990, 1991. And I remember when I was a student at Seoul today, I said, wow, there's a lot of grass on this campus, not knowing that it had been Lee Byung-cho's golf course. Now, it does not feel like a golf course. It's a giant collection of buildings. But we, 40 years ago, we helped create this campus. But we also helped create Weyeongguwan. We also Pangmungwan, the National Museum. And we were part of Korea's very first 5-year economic plan. We were advisors. At one time, we had 5 advisors in Korea, advising different ministries of the Korean government, including the Ministry of the Economic Planning Board back in 1962 on Korea's first 5-year economic plan. We donated a total of about 1 million books to Korea over a 40-year period, and we've given about almost 200,000 books to North Korea. And we've given grants to over 6,000 individuals and organizations in Korea, including one of my dearest, Han Seung-ju, former Minister of Foreign Affairs. We supported him when he was a high school student back in 1956 to visit the U.S. for the first time for a summer camp. So we've been investing in the Korean people for close to 60 years. This is just to show you some images of some of our programs. Again, I mentioned the textbooks that we provided. One of our very first reps was Jack James, but we were supporting the film industry here. Is anyone familiar with Lee Dae-won? I consider him to be one of Korea's great artists of the 20th century. He passed away a few years ago, but before he passed away, he gave us one of his pictures, and it was turned into a print, panhwa, that we were able to give to our supporters. And I still have, lucky, it was like finding treasure. I found a couple of boxes of his print in our office that we didn't even have one on our walls, but. I consider him sort of inspired by the Impressionists, but he grew up and lived on an orchard near Seoul, and we supported him in the 1950s to open one of the first art galleries in Korea. And when we had our 50th anniversary back in 2004, he was kind enough to give us one of his pictures that we had print made and then gave to our supporters. But just an example of the kind of people that we've supported over the years. That's David Steinberg back in the late 90s. I think it was roughly the same age I am now. So even though I'm losing hair, it's nice to see that I still had more hair than he had when he was my age. Something's going to change. In the 1970s, actually, we were focused more on agricultural development here. These are some of our projects in the 1970s. And in the 1980s, we were looking at social services, but we were also, I was just looking today, we're going to receive an award on Thursday from the National Election Commission about Joongang Ilbo, for our work on elections and sort of supporting Korea's transition to democracy. So we were working in social services and democratic transition and consolidation in the late 80s, early 1990s. In the 1990s, we were focusing on the rule of law. One of my predecessors, this is Tam Ormiston, who's a lawyer now somewhere in the Midwest. I want to say Nebraska. But he was a lawyer who was represented in the early 1990s, working with the Constitutional Court to help instill the rule of law here in Korea. And in the 2000s, we were focused on good governance. Migrant labor was another issue. We looked at regional cooperation, and you can see one of my predecessors, Scott Snyder, was a very good friend. I think it's in Seoul at this very moment, if I'm not mistaken. And then we had our 50th anniversary. That's our former president. What we had here. Our current mission here in Korea, and again, it's evolved, just as Korea has changed, our mission has evolved, is we partner with Korean organizations to help Korea become a global development partner. And as I mentioned, we're now the hub office for Northeast Asian cooperation. And generally very quietly, we tend not to advertise our activities. We try to engage North Korea. I mentioned that we get a lot of our funding from the U.S. government. So we tend to be a bit quiet about our activities on North Korea so as not to offend sensibilities in Washington. But we also don't want to offend North Korea. And so we often don't talk about our work with North Korea. It's not secret, but we just don't seek publicity for this activity. This is just an example. So in terms of engaging North Korea, this is from a study tour that we co-sponsored last year. We had 12 officials from North Korean economic ministries visit Silicon Valley, Wireless Valley in San Diego, and then Wall Street. Sometime when they were in Silicon Valley, it leaked to the media that this program was taking place. And I don't know if you're media. If you're really following the media, you might remember that last spring, there were media reports about the group visiting Stanford University. But they also visited farms in the Sacramento area. They visited Google Earth. They got the virtual tour of Pyongyang that really freaked them out. What? You're not an intelligence organization? We can take this virtual tour of Pyongyang? But then when they went to Wall Street, they got to ask Citibank, so why did you cause the economic crisis in 2007, 2008? I wish I could have been there for that exchange. So we're committed to trying to help North Koreans get exposed to the United States and the world, and give them books in their major universities and libraries. So this is our Books for Asia program. So we give about 12,000 books a year. This is our biggest ongoing project with North Korea, and almost 200,000 since the mid-1990s. The biggest recipient has been the Inmindae Haseukdan, but also Kim Chek-dae, Kim Il-sung-dae, and all the major universities, including Pyongyang Gwagi-dae, which is recently established, are all recipients of our books. And so this is really presents us with our opportunity for visiting North Korea to make sure that our books are being received and hopefully being used. And in fact, when I visited Pyongyang about 6 years ago, I was not with the foundation, but I went to the Grand Eagle Study Hall and was able to go to a shelf, and I pulled out some books, and sure enough, some of these books were from the Asia Foundation. You'll notice science, technology, medicine, economics, business. There should be a comma there. English, it's not just business English. You'll notice democracy is not on the list of books. But again, every country has its sensitivities. Back in the 70s and 80s, we were not allowed to send books here that dealt with Marxism. The Korean government here would check each shipment back in the late 80s, until the late 80s, to make sure that we were not trying to subvert the Korean population, South Korean population. If I have to point to why do we still have an office here, I would say the turning point was actually our 50th anniversary. It was not just our 50th anniversary, but at that time we set up what we call our Friends of the Asia Foundation. We have a board of directors. Lee Hong-gu is the chairman. And creating this organization was critical to finding a new mission and new partners. And it's perhaps ironic that two of my sonbae, Kim Ki-hwan and Han Seung-ju, have really been critical to helping us find new partners here, new mission and new partners. And so our members are really some of Korea's leading opinion leaders and opinion makers in Korea. But the Friends of the Asia Foundation has been critical. And by the way, we'll be having if you're not on our mailing list, we'll be having our next, our only meeting of the whole year will be on May 30th. And you're all invited. If you haven't received an invitation, just give me your card. And we'll be at the Chosun Hotel on the evening of May 30th. It will be a reception. Our executive vice president will visit from San Francisco. We'll have a Blue House and Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials as our speakers. And we'd love to have you join us, as long as it doesn't conflict with a Royal Asiatic Society program. I think it's a Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. And these are just some of our corporate partners. To be honest, we're not as adept as the Asia Society or Korea Society in terms of attracting corporate partners. These are some of our corporate sponsors. So that kind of ends my discussion about the Asia Foundation as a foundation and our office here. And so now I'll turn to look at Korea's ODA experience as a development partner, and then our role in trying to help facilitate Korea's role. And the first data that I'd like to show you is the fact that Korea, as of last year, was the 8th leading country in the world in terms of exports. Very, very impressive. But if you look at overseas development assistance of members of the OECD, Korea is more like 18th instead of 8th. And we've highlighted New Zealand, the home of my classmate and very close friend, Steve Nepstein. Portugal and Spain, because these are countries with relatively the same level of economic development. That's amazing. The Kiwis and Koreans have the same level of economic development? Amazing. But that even among countries of roughly the same level of economic development, Korea is behind. That Korea's stature as an exporter does not match its stature as an overseas development assistance provider, at least in terms of per capita percentage of its GDP. On the other hand, if you look at just over the last decade or so of Korea's ODA contribution, it has increased dramatically from the 200 million level to almost $2 billion, roughly almost 10 times in just over 12 years. So South Korea, and specifically, I know NB is not the most popular leader in the world right now, or at least in Korea, but really, I have to give a lot of credit to NB to really putting emphasis on the expanding Korea's ODA. You can see this dramatic increase, particularly since he became president, and the commitment that he made to have Korea's ODA match its stature. This is just to show you, so the absolute increase has been very dramatic. This is just to show you the sectors that it's been, again, South Korea, like Japan, following in the footprints of JICA in Japan, Korea is focused on hardware, on buildings, infrastructure. And so social infrastructure, schools, and whatnot, as well as economic infrastructure. I was in Sri Lanka, and one of the big projects there is a convention center that they're building in Sri Lanka. The Asia Foundation, we tend to focus on software. And just one irony about Sri Lanka, I had a chance to visit, and I had brunch with the Korean ambassador to Sri Lanka, and he was telling me his biggest challenge being an ambassador is trying to get Sri Lankans to stop referring to their slums as Korea. Now, why in the world would Sri Lankans describe their slums as Korea? Anyone want to give a guess? How in the world would Sri Lankans know to call their slums Korea? No one has a guess? Sri Lanka, otherwise known at the time as Ceylon, was one of the countries that participated in the Korean War. And the Sri Lankan soldiers who came here and saw the devastation and poverty of Korea in the Korean War went back to Sri Lanka, and Korea became a shorthand for their slums. They still use that term, even today. Bit ironic. I only learned a few weeks ago that the ugliest building in downtown Seoul, the U.S. Embassy and the Korean Culture Center, were actually gifts of the Philippines. Who knew? I didn't. Until very recently. But anyway, so Korea tends to focus on hardware, on buildings, if you will. This is just to show you the numbers in terms of Korea's annual ODA. Now again, President Lee made a commitment that Korea would basically triple its ODA from 2009 to 2015. And this is just a chart that shows you the increase, over the last dozen years or so, from insignificant in 2000 to quite significant today, tripling from 2000 to today, and again it will double again over the next several years. And this is to show you Korea's top 10 ODA recipients. And where's the action? Asia. Top 9 countries are all in Asia. A very good fit, if I must say, with the Asia Foundation. And so the top 9 recipients of Korean ODA, and these are in millions of dollars, is overwhelmingly to other countries in Asia. Another statistic that I wanted to share with you is to show the dramatic increase in the number of volunteers, of Korean volunteers. This is a fairly new phenomenon. It only started back in '91. It's only about 20 years old. but Korea, and I must say, and to be accurate, there are far more missionaries than there are Korean missionaries abroad than there are Korean overseas volunteers. But now Korea is sending 1,000 Koreans every year to Asia, to Africa, all over the world to participate in development projects. And now, to put these numbers in context, I'd like to show you the contrast with Japan. Korea is roughly equal, in fact, as of last year, is equal with Japan. This is a country with much greater per capita GDP, with 2.5 times the population, and Korea is now equal with Japan in terms of the number of volunteers that it's sending to foreign countries. So it's, how you look at Korea's ODA policy depends on the number. If you look at the absolute terms, dramatic increase. If you look at it in comparison to Japan, catching up and Korea's caught up to Japan. But in terms of OECD members, still catching up in terms of Korea's ODA. And then I just wanted to show you a few pictures to show you some of the Korean overseas volunteers. I was in Nepal back in March, and I got to sit down and have dinner with a couple of Korean women who were volunteers. And by the way, the majority of volunteers, the majority of employees at KOICA, as well as volunteers, are women. And I think Korea's best export now is not Sonyoshide, as much as you may like Sonyoshide. I think Korea's best export is women who are helping the rest of Asia develop. And these are just a few pictures that I like of some of their programs. So my last topic for this evening, before we open up to discussion, is to look at the Asia Foundation. We call ourselves TAP, and our role in helping Korea become a global development partner. And we have 3 major partnerships here today. The first is with the Korea Development Institute, and we have an annual research program. Last year was focused on development cooperation. It was tied to the high-level forum on aid effectiveness that was held in Busan last November. And we had a year-long research seminar with KDI, including in Sri Lanka last year. And then we published a book with KDI last fall, timed with the high-level forum. But it was considered one of the our program at the high-level forum in Busan was considered one of the most popular and well-attended of the entire HLF4 program in Busan. This year's project is focused on pro-poor growth. I'm always easy to find in pictures. Just look for the head that sticks up higher than everybody else's. But we held this meeting in New Delhi, and unfortunately, I had to find out the hard way just what exactly Delhi Belly means. But we have our first program is in New Delhi. Our next one is in June in Beijing, and then we'll have a wrap up here in Seoul this fall. We also have a partnership with the KDI Graduate School. We hold international development conferences and seminars. And more importantly, we have a capacity building program. And so KDI School is now a major partner for us. We have a 1-week program. In fact, the group will be going to Laos in a couple of weeks. And then we have longer-term programs for individuals, basically to send Koreans to our offices in other offices in Asia and to bring Asians here to learn about the Korean development experience. We've had close to 100 participants so far from the government, NGOs, academia, media. And we focus on themes that relate to the country that they're actually going to. And so for Laos, it'll be natural resource management, since that's a big issue for Laos. And our newest partner, and this only happened last December, and frankly, this has really excited my headquarters because the Asia Foundation is KOICA's first partner that is a non-Korean NGO. And KOICA, for us, is the first non-Western partner. So this is a very new and exciting partnership, and the reason I got to go to Sri Lanka was to visit our project sites, to meet my Sombe, Nilan Fernando, and to visit our project sites. I was in Batikaloa and Panmunai on the East Coast. And let me tell you, if you're traveling from Colombo, which is hard to see on the map, but it's in the southwest, it's a very exciting journey by car to get to the East Coast. You feel like you're taking your life, and you can stay if you're in a car, you can stay in your lane, or you can pass the other vehicles to get there faster. And it's not for the timid, let's just say. I didn't see any elephants, but I did see waste disposal sites that we're considering to help local governments better deal with waste disposal. And this is $1 million project that we have. So this is our first project where all of the money that we raise here in Seoul is to work with Korea in third countries. And so this is really exciting for me, but also for our headquarters, that we can help Korea become this global development partner. But it's focused on very mundane, very unexciting things like increasing local tax revenues. And I sat down with mayors of Batikaloa and Panmunai, and they were so excited that we had shown them how they could raise more money, how they could collect tax revenue more effectively, and then spend it on their citizens. And so improving local services, supporting tourism. Batikaloa was a port city set up by the Dutch and the Portuguese 400 years ago, and they have a fort that's still there. It's a beautiful coastline, devastated by the tsunami in 2004. Beautiful coastline, rich history, but nobody knows about this place. And so we're going to try and help them to develop their tourism facilities. So we're working with KOICA, again, they're hardware, we're software. You know, with any computer, you need both. You can't just have one or the other. So we found a complementary partnership with KOICA. And this is with you can see I tower over your average Sri Lankan. But on the upper left there is the mayor of Panmunai, Oxford educated. I felt like I was acting out the king and I. He would say, "Come!" And I felt like I should say, "Yes, Yul Brenner, I'll follow you." But really, really neat. Both mayors were really impressive people. The mayor of Batikaloa, the woman that I'm shaking hands with, she lost her father in the Civil War. She's still only in her 30s, but she's facing re-election this fall. But they're both very committed to developing their cities to help their citizens, and they need partnerships. They don't need money. In fact, we've given them very little. We've had existing programs. We've given them very little money. It's the old, give them fish or teach them how to fish. And we've taught them how to fish better. And so they don't really care about the money because we're not giving them money. We're trying to help teach them strategies for being better leaders. And so it was really, to be honest, I've never visited a field project before. It was really exciting. The lower left picture, it's not very exciting, but we painted the walls and we taught them, it wasn't just paint, but it was teaching them how to collect tax revenue. And this really made a difference for these cities. And it's really hard to show that in pictures. But those are the kind of projects we do. This is a picture I took in Nepal. Long ago, I used to be a photographer, and the Nepalis are just absolutely wonderful people. And this is in the Kathmandu Valley. Kathmandu is incredibly ugly. You get out of Kathmandu, it gets really beautiful and really interesting. And sorry if I've talked for too long, but love to take your questions. And again, I know from the interest in Andre Lomkov's talk that if you want to talk about North Korea, I'm happy to talk about North Korea, but I'm also more happy to have a chance to talk about something that isn't North Korea. So I'm happy to take questions on any subject that I've raised or that I haven't raised.
Thanks so much indeed. thanks to this particular gathering, this small research effort. Number one question, when it comes down to ODA, or the committee of OECD, we became a committee member, a committee country, right? OECD.
DAC.
Right.
DAC member.
It's amazing. But, when it comes to this kind of system program, we do know that everybody agrees in Korean churches. I mean, whatever denomination we just accept.
I tend to deal in 10s and 20s.
Right, but the charity, the charity of its organizations, I think is a huge amount of contributions being done. So how do you interpret when you are talking about one particular country, this kind of an audience program in general? And the number two question, one of my senior members, he is very good shape, very healthy, but he's very anxious to become a QUICA volunteer, but they said there's an age limit, 65 or something like this. I mean, do you think it's quite fair? I think there are many, I only not know better, but many Korean senior guys who find much more free time. They would like to make use of their talent, experience, so.
Well, your second question about age discrimination,
Maybe.
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I'm not Korean. It's not my decision to make in terms of age limit. Does the Peace Corps have a limit?
Yeah, that's one other question.
There's no limit on the age for Peace Corps volunteers. And Tom, you are a former volunteer, aren't you? Oh, you are too? Oh.
Very interesting.
In what country? Oh, you were here.
1977.
대단하십니다. 존경합니다.
I never knew about
네, 우리 병업 봉사당원 출신 분들이 상당히 존경해요. Well then, that's bad, isn't it? But Korea's changing, and I'm sure it's a matter of time before that changes as well. Now, on your first question, I think Korea is number 3 in the world in terms of volunteers, in terms of overseas volunteers. They're number 2 for religious volunteers, and I have personal ties to this because my brother-in-law's brother was killed in Afghanistan. My brother-in-law, Bae Hyung-gyu 목사님. My 동서의 동생, and who led the group in Afghanistan. I think that was a mistake, even though it was my brother-in-law's brother. I think it was a mistake for him to take that group there. But it is a fact that Korean missionaries are more active and aggressive in terms of providing assistance than QUICA is. What I don't know is to the extent to which they're complementing each other in their activities. My sense is that their activities are very separate and they're not trying to coordinate their efforts. But this is not just a problem between religious and non-religious communities, but between governments. There's not adequate coordination between Japan and Korea, or Korea and the U.S., and that's one of the goals for the Korea and for the Asia Foundation is to try to improve coordination of different activities. But yes, Korea has a huge missionary, second largest in the world, that are trying to help developing countries.
Africa, I think that China, of course, is putting a lot of effort into Africa, and I know Korean churches are doing quite a lot of work, like in well digging, water supply, that direction in Africa. Africa didn't figure pretty much. It was just at the end, just at the bottom was Angola.
That's right.
Number 10. But do you see an expansion in for Africa in the future?
person, that you have to ask the Korean government. But it seems obvious from the numbers and from this list that Korea is focused on its region. I looked at the numbers today. About half of the money that Korea spends on ODA is to Asia, and Africa's far away. And China is viewing Africa through a slightly different lens than Korea is. China is basically trying to exploit natural resources in Africa. And again, having been in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankans have no illusions. They know that they have no love for China, no love for India, and no great love for China either. And they know that China is there for the money and the natural resources. And Korea it's not quite so blatant or obvious. And in fact, the image of Korea in Sri Lanka is actually quite positive, because the work visa system for foreign workers is actually the best, I'm told, the best in the world. That Sri Lankans would rather come to Korea than any other country, because it's sponsored by the Korean government, and the work conditions are actually much better than they are in the Middle East or in other Asian countries. So it's relative in some ways. I see my Sonde has a question.
This is a really interesting question. I haven't really thought about this. That's a very interesting chart in terms of what it shows for some of the things you're talking about. But that it raises the issue. If I look at those top 10 ODA recipients, what you find with Afghanistan and Angola being interesting outliers, Afghanistan can be explained by Korea's military presence, and thinking about Joongang Christian viewpoint in the way that it has unfolded over the last 5 years. But the other countries on that list are all the top places for international maritime migration and labor migration into Korea. And that would probably explain a lot of the desire for any sort of connections with them. The one other place that is not really represented that would seem to be important, and I'm wondering why it isn't on the list, is, I can imagine the reason that China as a destination from which we receive international maritime migration and labor migration, and what the relationship is that Korea has made a determination that it will not give any aid to China, or how that plays out.
That's a very interesting question. That I actually hadn't made that connection, but I'm looking for actually one of my early slides. If you look at, we have a fairly large program. In fact, China for us is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is our number 7? It's our 7th largest program, and this creates some controversy in the U.S. Why are we spending $4 million in a country that's competing with the U.S.? And our work in China is focused primarily on rule of law, which I think it's safe to say China could use a little bit more of. And so, but it's not without controversy for the U.S. That's interesting. I hadn't really. I'll have to ask my colleagues and counterparts at COICA why they've made a decision not to have China be a prominent country. I guess Koreans already appreciate that China is as much a friend as a potential threat, and that there really isn't a need for volunteers or for projects in China. And again, for us, it's not, and again, it may be the nature of the development assistance. COICA, again, it's very old school. It's buildings, infrastructure. We're more of a training software organization. So, China they're building faster than they can put the cranes up, but they still have a long ways to go on the software side. So that might partially explain why we're so active there and COICA is not. But to be honest, I haven't really thought about that.
Oh, it's just public health. Are you involved at all in public health issues?
The short answer is very little. It's not one of our major thematic areas. We're not digging wells. We're not providing vaccinations. So we're really not involved with public health issues.
Is that because we think other groups do it better?
I wouldn't say because I think it's just kind of the nature of our organization. It's more on economic development more broadly than health issues. But to be honest, I don't know why we evolved in that direction. But at some point, and I don't know when, we made the decision that we wouldn't be working in that area.
One of the sort of anecdotal things one always hears around the world about developments and aid is a lack of long-term effectiveness for all manner of reasons, which everyone in the room has heard of. Could you briefly outline for us what kind of long-term evaluations your organisation carries out to determine, dollar for dollar, how effective you are?
That is the biggest challenge in the development, or one of the biggest challenges, is long-term effectiveness. In fact, when I was in Nepal, I was doing some trekking with the Quaker representative in Nepal, and we happened to just wander into a women's co-op that had been set up in a village outside of Kathmandu. The building had been built by the Japanese about 12 years ago. And they built the building and they left. And several years later, the building began to languish. It was not being used really for anything. And it was the Koreans who came back several years ago, and it was a very small South Korean NGO that came back and said, "Hey, you've got the facilities here, but you need a program." And this woman, and she set up an NGO called Beyond Nepal. It started out as a one-woman NGO. She has a Nepali partner, a lawyer that she's working with, and she almost single-handedly revitalized this project in Nepal that had originally been paid for by the Japanese. So this is a big problem. The focus in development tends to be on ribbon cutting. New school, new hospital, new building, and then they tend to walk away. And so this is a big challenge. And again, because we focus on software, we like to think that that's more long-lasting. That if you're giving people new skills, new way of thinking, that they'll carry that farther than a new building. Now, you need infrastructure, you need wells, you need waste disposal, you need buildings, but you need to train individuals about how to use those facilities and how to be effective leaders. So we try to focus on the software side of things, which we like to think is more long-lasting, or at least complements the building activity that's taking place. But this is the biggest challenge, and why we try to form partnerships. And the biggest challenge that we face, frankly, and this is not just in the development world, but in other organizations that I've worked with, is having partners that have a sense of ownership. It's very easy to say, we're the wealthy donor, here's some money for a project, and then you feel good about giving the money, and then you walk away. But that's not the end of the story, is it? It's making sure that the individuals understand how to use that money, that they change their way of thinking, and that's harder. It's a lot harder to do that than it is to just build a building or give some money. And frankly, whether you're focused on hardware or software, there's no automatic way of making sure that your investment is and your efforts are going to be long-lasting. And that's really the biggest challenge that we face. And so we try, we have 5-year and 10-year projects, and we're always conducting evaluation. Is this project effective? Because we're getting money from governments that are saying, we want to make sure our money is being spent well. And so, we have a project with the Korean Development Institute Graduate School, and we reached the end of 5 years. We had an external evaluator come in and say, we're paying you not to tell us what we want to hear, we're paying you to tell us if this program is effective or not. You'll get paid no matter what you tell us. We want to know, is this project effective? And so I think that's what governments and donors in general need to do, is to ask for hard-hitting assessments of whether or not project is really effective. And you can measure numbers, but you can also measure qualitatively in terms of talking to people. So that's the biggest challenge that we face, is the long-term sustainability of our projects.
Well, Myanmar, Burma. There are some positive changes last 1-2 years, and now you are thinking about Burma something.
We are. We are very serious about resuming our project in Burma, but we would like sanctions to be fully lifted. U.S. sanctions to be lifted. The U.S. government and Congress in particular is a major funding source for us. So we're cautious as a foundation in that we want to make sure that we have bipartisan support for entering or leading a country. So we're not the first organization to be back in Burma. Many organizations are. I've heard that getting the hardest thing to do in Rangoon right now is to find a hotel room, because there are so many NGOs and aid groups that are there setting up offices that every hotel is taken. When I was there 6-7 years ago, it was like the hotel was empty, and now this is a boom. But we want to make sure that the changes that are taking place are going to be lasting, and so we're hoping that as soon as sanctions are lifted, U.S. sanctions are lifted, that we can go back in very quickly.
Back to the destination countries for Korean ODA. Are you aware of any particular policy that KOICA gives most of their aid to, directs most of their aid to Asia? Is it just a geographical thing? They happen to be close.
Not just geographic, but economic. That if you look at, these are, as my Sunday pointed out, that it's probably not a coincidence that these are not only the countries that Korea is trading with, but foreign labor, brides that are coming to Korea are coming from these countries as well. So I think that's really the factor that's really the factors that are really driving this. Is that this is where Korea sees its future in terms of trade and exchanges. That Africa is still relatively distant in that respect.
I can just follow up on that and what I said before. I mean, again, I'm really puzzled about Angola's presence, and from what I was saying, Uzbekistan's absence, for example. Any knowledge of that?
Thank you for giving me some homework. Well, it's a great question, because you're right. I had a chance to visit Uzbekistan, and there's very close ties here, labor and marriage, and a restaurant that I think we're going to be going to in about 10 days. There's some Uzbeki-run restaurants here. It's a very good question. Angola, I have no idea why Angola is number 10 on this list. I couldn't begin to tell you.
Just starting off what Professor Epstein said, I'm also surprised by Angola. I would have thought that if an African country were on the list, it would have been perhaps Madagascar, given the plan to rent a Belgium-sized chunk of Madagascar a couple of years ago. Do you know if that's anywhere under the 10-20 list?
No, I don't think Madagascar is, as far as I know. So I guess that's one of the up and coming countries, but I'll list now.
Thank you very much. There's one question. Yes.
I just wanted to ask if you know how many countries KOICA is in. We're looking at the top 10 there, but
I believe it's around 50. The last time I checked, KOICA has programs. They have representatives in more than 40 countries, and they have volunteers and projects in more than 50 countries. How many is it for the Peace Corps?
I don't know now.
Last one.
You suggested that in Sri Lanka they were very receptive to your idea of assistance with tanks and that sort of stuff, but in my experience, people don't really like advice from other people in is it tied to some kind of funding, or do you work with them to work out where there's going to be some kind of funding, like some kind of carrots as well? Because otherwise I find it hard to believe that they're so receptive to being,
it's a very good question. In fact, we, having been there and met with them, we actually have helped them put together proposals for aid from other organizations.
okay, right.
So they know, these leaders know that if they don't have a good game plan, they're not going to get funding for their projects. And we have, we have only one American, and he's Sri Lankan American, my Somde, Nilan Fernando, is the only American working in Sri Lanka. We have more than 20 Sri Lankans, including in the province of Sri Lanka. And so they are Sri Lankans working with these local governments. In fact, I was traveling with two of our economic advisors, one working on the public side, the other on the private side, and they are basically serving as informal advisors to these governments and helping them to figure out what it is they need to attract investment and what it is to attract ODA from other countries. So it's not just that they can benefit from our projects, but we're more than happy to help them find other projects. And the bottom line is they want to have more revenue so that they can have more that they can spend more money. And so we're basically showing them how to collect revenue. So, again, without giving them any money, other than just giving them a training program. And, frankly, I was amazed that they were so excited about tax revenue. It's not the most exciting subject in the world. But one of the mayors gave this presentation, and it wasn't just for me. He had invited the Sri Lankan media to attend this. It wasn't a news conference, but it was. He was advertising not just to me, but to the community that we're increasing our tax revenue and we're going to spend this money to help our citizens. So, and that's the key to a partnership. It's a sense of ownership that we're not just handing them something that they can keep, but they can use to better their society. But that is our biggest challenge.
Thank you very much.